We are back and we are joined by Alex Sammon, politics writer at Slate, who is with us, fighting through some of the a cold slash potentially, I don't know what it is, but apparently the DNC was a super spreader event. So welcome home, Alex. How was it? Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's an interesting event. It's like a nothing happens of consequence, but also, everything or everyone is there, and all these Democratic politicians. So it's like, it's both the most interesting and least interesting thing you can do. So yeah,
I
and then
was
everyone got sick.
I was listening to Democracy Now! Last week, and I saw Juan Gonzalez made this point, which I hadn't put together, that like back in the 80s, there used to be different coalitions that would come on the floor with signs that represented, what they wanted to say at the convention or represent or what their interests were. And it's really been replaced by, I mean, there was those few moments where the anti-genocide protesters were drowned out by the "We Love Joe" or the Kamala signs, but it's like there's this odd. It's become extremely corporate. I've only been, to I guess I didn't go to the 2016 convention. Actually, I just reported on it from the outside. But yeah, I mean, that's what strikes me a little bit, is that it seems like it's become basically a 4 day long advertisement for the party exclusively. It was always that, right? But now it's more like that's what it's become, as opposed to say like, hey, this different kind of coalition of Democrat can speak, etc.
Right. I mean, especially now, right? It's like the unity vibes are so high in the party, and it was just like a pep rally, basically. There's like only one faction that has any complaint about any policy position or anything else, and it's the ceasefire protesters and delegates, and even they didn't get their moment. So yeah, total pep rally. Lots of corporate sponsors also.
Right, right. And you mentioned there the ceasefire, the pro-Palestine, anti-genocide demonstrators, the uncommitted folks. Would you say that your observations at the Zionist Party showed an activated base? I mean, we'll get into that now, I guess. People should read your piece in Slate. I went to a Zionist Democrats party at the DNC. What I saw made me think there's a policy shift coming, is the title of the piece. What was the mood in the Zionist DNC
And can I just
party?
underline what Emma's saying? Zioness, like lioness.
Well, those were T-shirts that were handed out. I mean, it's
okay.
called, I guess it was called something else, right? It was no, maybe I'm wrong.
That's the name of the group, Zioness. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Matt. I assumed that was just like a sub tagline or like something for the T-shirt. No, that's
roar.
what they call. Oh, yes.
No, that's the org. Yeah.
It's interesting because, sometimes white supremacists use a lion as a symbol for their mighty, magnitude, right? And you can draw some real comparisons between Zionism and white supremacy, but we don't need to go there right now. So was Zioness, was it a bitchin' time?
Yeah. So like the funny thing about the DNC, right, is there's all this programming all day long, and then there's all this, sort of like nightlife stuff. There are all these parties, and so it's like two sides of the coin, right? There's the formal remarks during the day, and then the after hours stuff is also sort of important to get like a lay of the land and like, where things are at in terms of like, who's got the juice and who doesn't. And so like this group Zioness, I think it's actually a really interesting group. I don't go into too much detail of its backstory in the piece, but like it's sort of an AIPAC spinoff. It was like stood up in 2017 by the Lawfare Project, which is sort of a right-wing group. And one of the women, Ann Lewis, is an AIPAC person going back, years and years. And she was a Hillary Clinton advisor and stuff. It's been a pretty marginal group for a while, but it sort of was chartered at the same time as Democratic Majority for Israel. So it's sort of like part of the AIPAC strategy of like having a bunch of different orgs that they can sort of like stand up and sit down depending on how they want to spend in an election or whatever it is. So this group was like launching its action fund. So it was the first time that they're getting into political spending. Yes, you would think like, right. They obviously, AIPAC has spent a ton of money in this election cycle. They've been largely successful. Joe Biden has been utterly unwilling to accommodate anything other than the most sort of like AIPAC friendly position on Israel. So you would think it would be sort of like a triumphant moment, or at least like an ascendant feeling in the party. And it was like, obviously Zioness is the feminist version of AIPAC. So it was, progressive, pro-Zionist, pro-Kamala, I think was the slug for the party. But it wasn't that. So that's the whole thing. It was very hard to get on the list for this party because they were like, oh, we're so oversubscribed. Like the list is, is plus, overbooked and like more than 500 people. Like they sent out an email being like, you can't bring plus ones. Like this thing is going to be jammed. And then I got there and it was like 35 people. It had promised to bring, they had promised that 2 senators and 7 members of Congress would be speaking at this party. Both the senators no-showed. 6 of the 7 members of Congress did not speak. And, supposedly 2 of them were in the room and didn't speak. I didn't see them. The big closer was Mondaire Jones, who's not even in Congress. So it was an interesting dynamic. It was not like the triumphant sort of atmosphere that you might think, given the the sort of posture that I think AIPAC has had toward publicly in this election cycle.
So Mondaire Jones spoke. He's running for Congress again. You had an interesting interaction with Mondaire Jones at the end of this party. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So he was the big closer. And obviously he's had this massive political makeover. And he, when he came to Congress in 2020 was like the court reform, like the left-wing court reform guy, structural reforms. And now he's like, pro-Israel first and everything else is sort of second. And he's running in New York's 17th district. It's like an important flip for Democrats. They really want that seat back. It's like, it's Hudson Valley. It's pretty Democratic. It should be an easy win. And he's running against Mike Lawler. Yeah, he gave this speech that was, it sort of invoked the defensiveness and defiance, I think, of the whole event, where they were like, he was like, it's not a contradiction to love Israel and be progressive. It doesn't not make sense to be progressive and also pro Zionism. Like,
right.
It was a lot of those. It was like, like, don't let the criticisms get you down. Like, there's no contradiction in terms of our position, and we love Israel, and like we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that Netanyahu can, keep on keeping on. And like, I don't know, was it stirring? There weren't any people there to be stirred, but obviously I think that this is, he's also running against someone who is pretty close to AIPAC on the Republican side, and Mike Lawler, and I don't know. It's an interesting. The political calculus there is interesting. I'll just say that.
Absolutely. Here's an image of the shirts that you took at the Zioness AF event. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Did you take one of those home?
Oh, you better believe it. Yeah, I got it in my room right now.
I mean, that's got to be at least just, I don't know, some sort of collector's item, even if it's extremely depraved.
It only works visually because when you say Zioness, it just sounds like someone saying Zionist.
Right. Or did you misspeak, or do you know what you're talking about? So, like, you mentioned that they advertised that there were going to be many more politicians speaking who did not. Who were some of the other politicians, at least in attendance, and some of your observations from that?
Yeah, so the only sitting member of Congress who was supposed to be there and actually showed up was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and that was really funny because
of course
her speaking slot got nixed by the DNC on Monday night, so they kicked her off the program because they were running long or whatever, and she was one of the first casualties, which is honestly so funny because she's also a former chair of the DNC. Like, she's someone with like institutional standing, at least historically. And they scotched her from the program. So her like consolation prize was coming to this event and speaking at this event. And she gave like I don't like a 2 or 3 minute speech, and then she just bolted. Like it was not. I don't think her heart was in it. She did show up and she did sort of say what you would expect her to say, but then she was out of there. She was not hanging around. And the only other member of Congress who actually showed up was Brad Schneider from Illinois, and he wasn't even on the program. He just showed up because he's a he's a team
He's
player.
a huge Zionist.
Yeah,
he was just quoted in the Times of Israel, and they've been doing this like once a week. They'll the Times of Israel, which is like a right wing paper in Israel, will put out some article saying Kamala Harris won't change arms policy. Kamala Harris says this Democrat who talked to this aide. I mean, the Congress person who was quoted in that latest piece, which got some run, and I was trying to say, like, this is not somebody close to the team that can give you any kind of real assurances on this front, was that representative there. So that, I mean, I'm interested what the mood was. I mean, you talk about it in your piece, but it seems like just based on numbers alone, there's a bit of of deflation. Is there any even recognition of the Palestinian cause in an event like this, or like does the word Palestinian even like come out of anybody's mouth?
Definitely not. So
okay.
That was not. There was some interesting, like Van Jones was there to talk about how like the civil rights struggle and being pro-Israel are basically the same political project, which was very interesting. And which featured like this. I was surprised. I didn't get the exact quote, so I didn't put it in the piece, but it was just like he had this thing where he was like, the Black community and the Jewish community did the civil rights movement because you can't count on like the Puerto Ricans and the Swiss to get stuff done, and that's the same thing with Israel or whatever. And it was just
could he? Malcolm, just look up what Malcolm X had to say about Zionism. And I mean, like, that is such a cynical bastardization of that for that kind of audience. But he runs wherever the money goes, I guess. That's his thing these days.
Yeah, it's just funny because it's like, imagine if it was reversed and he was at like a anti-Zionist sort of event, like such a categorically political anti-Zionist event, like CNN would have fired him in 19 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's sort of interesting. Yeah, the mood was funny because it was like, So Ilan Goldenberg, who's the Harris campaign's new Jewish community liaison, spoke there as well, and he wasn't on the program. But if you look through his record, like progressives are sort of happy about that choice,
He's
right?
Okay. Yeah.
His track record is not so bad whatever. His track record is not so sort of conservative on Israel. It's a little more on the progressive side of things. So, the fact that he was there was interesting. It was like, I talked to someone who was like, he should have known better. He shouldn't have been there, which is interesting. At the same time, his remarks were sort of fascinating as well, because he was like, Kamala Harris, is very attuned to Jewish culture and a Jewish community. Like, her husband is Jewish, and they do, they've like done all these things at the White House, and they, they're going to continue to celebrate Jewish holidays and all this stuff. Which was interesting to me because it was not about Israel. It was about Jewishness, which, I thought was notable. It's funny to me too, because I think if you look through Harris's advisors on this stuff, you see that, like, especially on the foreign policy side, like, they're in the blob, but they're on the left edge of the blob, right? Like, it's they're not like, fire breathing progressives, but they're not Joe Biden. They're not Joe Biden's advisors.
That's what I've been saying. Yeah. I care about who her staff is more than I care about the rhetoric at this moment. In that same, even though we need policy concessions, but in terms of, like, if you want to forecast, tomorrow we're going to be having a guest on to talk about Phil Gordon and what her top advisor, national security advisor, who's expected to stay on in that role if she were to be president. He's currently the national security advisor to the vice president. And the study of this work that Michael Brennis did kind of comes to that same conclusion, where this is more of a return to Obama era, maybe foreign policy, at least as it relates to Israel, as opposed to giving them the farm. Taking a more even-handed approach, at least, is what he advocated for in his books. We would have to see if the infrastructure would be there for them to do that. But the fact that Ilan Goldenberg said just focus on Jewish identity at that event is interesting to me as well.
Yeah. And, like, I don't know, the speakers who were pretty rah-rah. I mean, obviously, right, this is also they were launching a political action fund. So it's like, the context there is important too. It was just a lot of like, there was a lot of talking about the past tense about how much Joe Biden valued the Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship and like how, and it's like, there's a reason they felt they even needed to have this event, right? Like there's a reason that you feel like you need to launch a pro-Kamala, progressive, pro-Israel organization. And it's because you don't trust that your position is being, sort of like taken care of without it. And so to me, it was interesting. It's one of those things where I think, obviously people are disappointed by the DNC programming, or, they felt coming out of that like there wasn't nearly enough said about the plight of the Palestinian people and everything else. And but I think that like, you go to these events and stuff and you feel, at least from the pro-Israel side, that there's concern from them. Like they feel like something might be changing. And to me, that feels notable.
We had a viewer write in, number 13, Netanyahu was literally mentioned by name. Like they were praising Netanyahu at this event, not even doing the liberal Zionist thing where they criticized Netanyahu or...
I asked Brad Schneider about this. I don't remember them saying exactly praising Netanyahu by name. But after Brad Schneider spoke, I went up to him and I was like, surely you're concerned about the fact that like Netanyahu would prefer Trump to win. And this approach is just politically suicidal for Democrats, right? The embrace of Netanyahu, who has, totally contrary motivations, political motivations to Democratic success. Surely that's a concern to you. And he was like, he was like, I'm not going to defend everything Israel has done. But,
close to it.
That was like, which is sort of an interesting line. It's like usually, you sort of, you expect a certain deftness with these very obvious questions. And that one didn't get dispatched very, very, very easily. And I was surprised by that. But I don't know. They weren't like, oh yeah, Netanyahu. But when I asked Schneider, he was like, he certainly, he didn't condemn him. He didn't say like, oh, obviously Netanyahu has gone too far and we need a better, leadership team or whatever. Which some Democrats have done, but he also was not willing to, it was sort of like he didn't really know what to do with it and wasn't willing to do any sort of real criticism. So,
how about AIPAC? Was AIPAC at all discussed at the event?
No mention of AIPAC, which is, obviously this group is very much in the AIPAC extended universe, and it didn't come up. There wasn't actually even much talk about the campaign spending of this cycle, which was interesting. There wasn't, they didn't talk about AIPAC's impact on the primary cycle in 24. There was no real mention of it. It was just, it was more of like, celebrating the Biden Israel policy and sort of being like, it's going to continue. We're going to do our best to try. And that was sort of the main, the primary note in the whole thing.
All right. Well, Alex, people should read your piece on this. It's fascinating. It's called "I Went to a Zionist Democrats Party at the DNC. What I saw made me think there's a policy shift coming." I really appreciate your time today, and rest up. Feel better.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.